Okay, so welcome to the Try This at Home Marriage Workshop. We are on our, what is this? Is this like the one, two, three, fourth workshop session? We're going to have two more after this. And the title of this session is To Know and Be Known, opening up the inside of ourselves in pursuit of intimacy. And, I know that this is going to be basically a continuation of last week's, where we were kind of trying to recover curiosity about each other. And you're going to see that theme kind of pulled throughout this presentation as well. I want to start out with a story. There was a man who just kept forgetting his wife's birthday. And then he kept forgetting their anniversary, and it was terrible. And it was an issue between the two of them. So he went to the florist and he said to the florist, look, can you schedule in these 2 days and just send flowers on those 2 days? I always forget. And so the florist said, sure. And on their anniversary, the man showed up, having forgotten the anniversary, and he saw flowers there and said, nice flowers, honey, where'd you get them? So here's the thing, is that building intimacy into a marriage is not performative. If you have the skills that we've been talking about in these presentations, it's going to be a very forgiving process. If you engage in an epic fail like this guy did, it's not the end of the story. It's a mistake, but it's not that it's going to trash your marriage because you make a mistake like that. There's going to be forgiveness in the process, because really intimacy building is more about that skill development and establishing those skills, not only in yourselves as individuals, but the utilization of those skills in your relationship with each other. So what happens in marriage is a lot of times we start seeing each other in terms of the immediate and the inconvenience or convenience of the other, just in terms of like sort of living in the same space and sharing a lot of the same logistics, the same children, the same house, the same bills. And you kind of see the other in those terms. I have to constantly remind myself to not let the first thing that comes out of my mouth in the morning to my husband be something about this needs to be done or that needs to be done, or did you do this yet? Because then I see him in only utilitarian terms, and he's my spouse, he's my partner. So anyway, some of the things that we say are, he wants the house a lot colder than I do. And that's a problem. That's true of my husband, by the way. We have an ongoing war with the air conditioning. He wants to crank it up really high. I turn it down when he's not looking, and then he turns it back up when I'm not looking. It's a covert war between the two of us. Okay, so she spends money in spells and doesn't warn me. People have different spending habits, and some people are really, more risk taking in their spending, and others want to save money, and that can be an upset in a marriage. He never supports me in my accomplishments. She laughs super loud in public, and that embarrasses me. We all have different social patterns, different social comfort levels, different things we're great at socially, we feel comfortable with socially, and things that we don't feel comfortable with socially. And now we're with someone, appearing in a social context with that person, and there's potential for embarrassment, for awkwardness that we wouldn't have if we were alone. He doesn't spend time with the family. She messes up the car. In other words, we're seeing the other only in terms of our expectations and our needs toward them and our desires toward them, and not in terms of who they are as a person. And then what happens often is there's a standoff, because you're constantly putting in front of the person things that you want them to do that they're not doing, or not do that they are doing. And then it starts to feel like control, and control is a relationship killer. So what do? Well, we have to back out of that, and we have to start pursuing true intimacy in our relationship with one another. So there's a strong correlation between emotional intimacy and sex. Sex exposes and joins the private parts of our bodies. And in fact, in scripture, sex metaphorizes marital love. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. In the sex act, the man's body gives something to the woman's body. I think that that's on purpose. I've gotten rebuked for that on Facebook, by the way, but I stand by it. I think that the physical is a metaphor of the spiritual and the emotional. And in physical intimacy, there's so many correlates between the way men are in a sexual context, very straightforward, literally, and the way women are, more they receive, And there's just a whole bunch of metaphors. So I believe that the sexual is a metaphor of spiritual and emotional intimacy. And so we see that in Ephesians 5:25. Being honest about our feelings is essentially emotional intimacy. And I like to think of it as Velcro. When we make love, we open up our bodies to the other person and two become one. When we achieve emotional intimacy, it's by opening up our emotional selves in such a way that the Velcro can take, we can bond with one another. You know, when I started Abide Network, which is the counseling and coaching network I started about 12 years ago, through which we're doing Try This at Home, I decided that I really want to build a community where people felt safe to talk about what was going on inside of themselves. Because I would notice in church, people would go to church and they'd sit there and listen to a sermon, and they'd sit in Sabbath school and talk about their opinions about the Bible. And there wasn't a lot of sharing of our feelings, you know, but being honest about our emotions. And because of that, it takes a long time to get to know people. So I created this community, this mental health community where people are safe to talk about their feelings. And what I'm finding is that they form relationships much more effectively, much more quickly. And that's what we do in marriage is we open up our, in best case scenario, open up our emotional selves. And it's like Velcro. We're going to connect more effectively when we open up. So as sex physically synchronizes partners, emotional sex, or the joining of the private inner parts of our souls, will emotionally synchronize. And I don't know if you know this, but when people make love, their hearts start to beat in sync. And there's various physical cues that sync up in that process. And so there's this joining, this real synchronization that occurs. And that same synchronization can occur emotionally. And by the way, we're having a session on sexuality right at the end. So I figured we'd go out with a bang. Hopefully I'll get David to show up for that one. He would enjoy himself so much learning about sexuality and talking about it. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that. But anyway, we by the way, always express our emotions. We always express our emotions, but we don't always use words to express them. So we can express them directly in words, or we can express them passively aggressively. We can experience those emotions unconsciously, and they're going to come out. We're going to either externalize them in our actions, in the way we act, the sort of the aura around ourselves, the attitude we have. Our emotions are going to manifest outwardly in that way, or we're going to internalize our emotions. And what happens if we don't learn to express emotions in a healthy way is we'll either externalize them in a negative way, cause problems in our relationships, or we'll internalize them. And that can often cause health problems and psychological problems for the individual. Now, it tends to be that men tend to be externalizers, women tend to be internalizers. There's an expression that says that men act out and end up in jail, women act inward and end up in therapy. So it's not categoric, but it does tend to be that way. So we always express our emotions. And this is why we need to learn to express them in words, because expressing emotions in words is the mature adult-like thing to do. The ability to say, I feel this way, is a very important part of growing up and being a self-regulated person. You know, you see in Genesis chapters 1-3, God created us for dominion. We were empowered in our original state. And first and foremost, we had dominion over ourselves. Self-control is a gift of the Holy Spirit. Well, all of that was lost as a result of the fall. But when we're out of control, we feel out of sync with the way God designed us. So one of the miracles God works in our lives through the gifts of the Spirit, the fruits of the Spirit, is he restores that self-control, and we have dominion over ourselves. And a big part of that is learning how to manage our own emotions. It's called emotional regulation. And that affect labeling, the ability to say, this is what I'm feeling, and that's all you say is, this is what I'm feeling, has the ability to help you regulate, because you cannot regulate what you don't have a conscious awareness of. But what happens when you verbalize, or even in your mind verbalize your feelings, is now you're consciously aware of what's going on. And once you verbalize something, then you can manage it. So it's a big part of emotional regulation. And it also helps to attenuate emotions, sort of manage and reduce the birth of emotions. There's a therapy that is done for specific phobia, arachnophobia specifically, fear of spiders, a disproportionate fear of spiders. And the therapy that is typically used for that is gradual exposure. So you look at a picture of a spider and then you calm down. And then the next session, you'll have a spider in a jar and you'll kind of calm down. You form new pathways in your brain when you do that systematic exposure. It's very, very powerful and effective. Well, affect labeling was found to be more effective than the classic treatment for arachnophobia. Just the ability to say, I feel this way right now, can help calm down those emotions. So this is my point, is learn to say, I feel, fill in the blank. First and foremost, tell God. In other words, you don't have to tell everyone. You have to announce it to the staff at work or to your boss. Don't do anything weird and then blame your therapist for doing it, or me for doing it. Admit it to God, admit it to yourself, and then admit it to people that you're close to, that you trust, your partner. Admit your feelings. I feel, fill in the blank. Just admitting your feelings, and that's a skill you can develop not only in yourself, but in your relationship, where your relationship is a place where you can admit how you feel. That would be a really healthy, wonderful development. You can see it in the Psalms. I am lonely. My life is spent with sorrow. Shame has covered my face. I will be glad. My eye wastes away because of grief. The psalmist expressed his feelings in words. And so that's God giving us permission to do the same thing. Now, this is going to be a hard one for men. Men are less naturally inclined to want to talk about their feelings. I'm not being chauvinistic or sexist, just stating a fact here. So here's a conversation I have with my husband often. I'll say, I feel hurt. And he'll say, I don't want feelings, I want facts. And I'll say, the fact is that I feel hurt. So here's the safety mechanism here. I'm going to bring in those folks that just showed up. Here's the safety mechanism here. And that is that when you're admitting your emotions, guys, and people that are afraid of admitting their emotions, even if you're not guys, when you're admitting your emotions, you're stating a fact. Okay. Joanne, please. There we go. So you're admitting a fact. When you admit your emotions, you're admitting a fact. And that should help it not feel like you're just going down the roller coaster of emotions. And actually admitting those feelings, paradoxically, makes you more capable of regulating them, as I mentioned a moment ago, but it also makes you more capable of experiencing them fully. So if you don't admit your emotions, you never experience them fully because they're so overwhelming that you start to stuff them and numb them out and escape from them. But if you can learn to admit them and then therefore be in a position to regulate them, you will be able to experience them more fully at the same time. I have these backyard chickens that I get a kick out of, and every evening, these chickens, they can be running around my property. I have 8 acres. They can be just running around all day. I don't even know where they are. I'll look for them for hours sometimes and can't find them. At least when they started out, I would look for hours because I was afraid, but I didn't know this fact, and that is that they come home every night when it gets cool. And that's true of a lot of animals. A lot of animals start coming out. The searing heat of the day, especially here in Florida, is so overwhelming that it's going to be difficult for those animals. They're all going to hide away in the bushes, and that's what the chickens do. But they come out in the evening, and that's kind of how our emotions are. If we can lift off some of the judgmentalism, some of the criticism, some of the hurtful things we do with each other, and make our relationships a safer place, The little emotions, the little animals are going to be able to come out in the cool of the day, just like the chickens come home to roost. So a big part of this is recovering curiosity about each other, recovering curiosity. Did you know you cannot be curious and judge people at the same time? It's impossible. So what you're going to do is you're going to learn to ask questions from a place of loving curiosity about that person. And a big part of this is looking at the process versus the content. As we mentioned previously, you don't have to worry about solving every conflict in your marriage. That's unrealistic. Most, if not most, of the conflicts are perpetual, what we call perpetual conflicts. And so just trying to make everything perfect and resolve every conflict is unrealistic. What matters more is how you actually talk about the conflict. And so process, that's how you talk about the conflict, matters more in most cases than the content, which is the conflict itself. The content is what, the process is how you talk about the what, and process is more important than the content. So let me give you an example of how this worked out in my marriage. My husband and I would get in the car. He really loves, we enjoy getting dressed up for church and driving to church together most Sabbaths that I'm home. So we would get in the car and he would not put on his seatbelt and I would. And that obnoxious little ringer would go off again, ding, ding, ding. And if he had it his way, he would leave that thing dinging the whole time. And we have like a half-hour drive to church. He would leave it dinging the whole time if he had his way. But every week I would say, Michael, because I would see him flying through the windshield. If God forbid we got in an accident, or I would see him, or just the bell itself would drive me crazy. So every week I would say, Michael, can you please put your seatbelt on? And every week it happened the same way. We'd take off down the road, ding, ding, ding. Michael, can you put your seatbelt on? And he would reluctantly put his seatbelt on. So I started to get to the place where I was formulating a lecture in my mind, you know that I am going to ask you to put the seatbelt on. You know that I'm not comfortable driving without that seatbelt on for safety reasons and because of that obnoxious bell. You know this, and you know that every week I ask you, I so far have not ignored the ding or overlooked the seatbelt issue. Every week I've said, can you please put on? So it would seem to me that you would anticipate that and that you would realize that I'm not going to be okay with the seatbelt, and you would, I'm formulating this lecture in my mind. And you know what? It would have been a great lecture and it would have been true, but it absolutely would not. It would have been bad process, to be honest. So I decided to approach it differently. And I just asked curious questions from a place of loving curiosity. And I learned some things. I said, Michael, what keeps you from putting on the seatbelt? And I learned that he was worried about wrinkling his jacket. And so, we formed some alternate strategies. Maybe you could take your jacket off before you get in the car. Maybe that would work out better. And, is there any other reasons why you just don't? Does it occur to you that I'm over there bothered each time? What do you think about that? We just had a conversation about it. It was actually kind of a funny conversation. And I know you're dying to know if he started putting on his seatbelt. And the good news is, yeah, he did more often. There are still some times that he doesn't. But you know what? I'm going to go back to the curious questions, because I was able to, resolve an issue somewhat without taking a hit on our relationship or on his self-respect. So that's what I mean by process versus content. Okay, so here's a worksheet that I want you guys to work on this week if you get a chance. The knowing one another assessment. And you're going to see how well you know each other. So you're going to check if you feel your partner knows you in these ways: your physical health, your emotional health, etc. So you're going to give 1 point for each. So you're going to ask your partner about your physical health, about your emotional life, feelings and struggles. Just ask some leading questions. and see how well they know you, and then go through the same process for how well you know them and give 1 point for each. I just screenshotted that right out of your workbook. So go ahead and play with that one. And I want to go back to this point of when we keep asking for changes from our partner, it's going to start to feel like control. It's going to start to feel like I want to change you so that I can love you rather than I love you the way you are. So I want to talk now about individuality versus intimacy, because there is a tension here. There's a paradox here. We want to maintain our individuality. If we feel like our partner is constantly asking for changes in us, we're going to start to feel threatened. We're going to start to feel like I can't be myself in this relationship. So individuality is a sense of personal freedom. It's sovereignty over one's own body and mind. It's a sense of personal agency. I get to make choices. I'm not being controlled by another or micromanaged by another. I can use my own judgment. The person isn't always trying to exert their judgment on me. The ability to choose and having clear personal boundaries, all of those are bound up in individuality. Intimacy, however, is kind of the reverse of that, where we sort of release some of our individuality in a sense, but ideally it's released volitionally on the part of the person, not taken from us. But that intimacy is a sense of being connected. It's the joining of one's body and or mind to another. It's collaboration. It's a partnering of the wills, and it's a yielding of personal boundaries. So of course it has to be done volitionally, because you can never just bust through someone else's boundary without violating the relationship. And really, a marriage is a very careful balance between these two things, maintaining our sense of individuality and also our sense of closeness to one another. And keeping that balance is challenging in a marriage. And it is the relationship that challenges that balance the most of any relationship you'll ever have. Trying to stay an individual in a relationship as close as a marriage it's a feat, and it really requires God and his spirit and prayer and the kinds of things that we lean so heavily on. So in the marriage relationship, there's kind of this dance between individuality and intimacy. And what's going to happen is there's going to be stages where you're moving from individuality into intimacy, and then out of intimacy back into individuality. So if you have a session of lovemaking, there's going to be a lot of intimacy. You're going to have probably intimate conversations following that. And then you're going to have to get up and get your clothes on and go to work and meet people. And so what happens is there's two kind of fragile stages in that dance. The disconnecting stage, where you fear loss of intimacy. You've now gotten very close to someone and now you're disconnecting, and you're going to fear losing that intimacy. And then the fragile stage of connecting and fearing losing your individuality. Now, I'd like to just ask a question. I think I asked something similar to this during the workshop in the church, but let me ask you this question and put your answer in the chat. Who do you think, male or female, is more concerned with loss of intimacy? So put wives or husbands and intimacy and loss of intimacy. So wives or husbands and loss of intimacy. And then who do you think is more fearful of losing individuality? Wives or husbands, loss of individuality? I'd be very interested in your feedback on that, and I'll look at it afterward. So as it turns out, we have different attachment styles. So avoidant attachment style is basically an attachment style that is characterized by a fear of losing individuality. Like if I'm an avoidant person, I'm going to be very afraid of being engulfed by my relationships. I'm very protective of, I want to do things my way. A person who has an anxious attachment style is going to be more afraid of losing intimacy. They're going to be more like clinging to the other person. Now, there's also a secure attachment style where you're not particularly afraid of either. And that's what we want. That's the ideal. But these are the things that we tend to fall prey to depending on our temperament. And I think somewhat depending on our sex. So I did a little bit of research and I found out that that things like this across countries, men tend to be higher in avoidance while women are higher in anxiety. So it doesn't seem to be influenced by culture or social factors. It seems to be innate. And to me, it would make sense. Women are bonders. We're estrogen dominant. Men are more, conquerors, testosterone dominant, and there's a whole sequel of reasons why those hormones would bring about those outcomes. So here's another quote from another study. The finding, while not necessarily surprising, is thought-provoking. Overall, men tended to be more avoidant and less anxious than women. Women, on the other hand, were more prone to being anxious in their married relationships. So we're going to find that overall, and I don't want to categorize these things or dogmatize them, because really the sex differences in terms of the psychology of the sexes are temperament issues, and people have different temperaments even within themselves. And so your sex will not necessarily determine all the factors. And I don't want to dogmatize or homogenize all women or homogenize all men, but it tends to be this way, that women are more anxious in their attachment style and men are more avoidant. Men are more avoidant, fearful of losing individuality. Women overall are more anxious and fearful of losing intimacy. And it's important for us to draw together for this reason, because we each have different agendas. And with both of those agendas having a right to show up in the marriage, we're going to have a balance. So here's a very common cycle that comes out of this phenomena. Husbands tend to be afraid of losing individuality, and they're going to be more inclined to withdraw from the relationship. The wife is going to want connection, and she's going to be more likely to express need. And then that could trigger the husband's fear of loss of individuality. He could withdraw more, and the wife could be more inclined to approach the relationship and express need, and that can threaten a man. So I want to go to some biblical data here, because it's very interesting how this all factors into biblical teachings. We're told that in several places, husbands should love their wives. Another place it says they should understand them. And another place says honor their wives. And then in various places, wives are told to submit to and respect their husbands. So there's a little bit of difference in the counsel that is given. In fact, there's a whole book, Love and Respect, that was written by Egerich, where he develops this whole idea very, very thoroughly. And it's made some people quite angry, and they think he's sexist. So I don't want to exaggerate the differences, but they are there. There are different instructions given to husbands versus wives in regards to how to approach the relationship. Overall, we see more encouraging wives to respect their husbands, and overall, we see more encouraging husbands to respect their wives. What's going on with that? Well, let's think about it for a moment here. Respect language reduces anxiety about losing individuality. What you're doing when you respect someone is you're saying, I respect you as an individual. And it's going to give the message that the respected is adequate and effective. I see this happen all the time in marriages, that the wife goes to the husband with her needs, and he feels like instead of feeling like she's just coming with her needs, he feels like she's attacking his adequacy as a husband. And so my thinking is that what Paul was doing is giving wives a key to offsetting that, because women are going to have their needs, husbands too, but women especially are going to have needs, and they're going to need to express them. Maybe some of that respect language will help offset that, is my thinking. And then affection language reduces anxiety about losing intimacy and tends to give a message that the beloved will not be abandoned. So I think what Paul is doing in giving this counsel is encouraging married individuals to talk a language that their spouse is most likely to understand. Now, you're not going to hit the target every time, because as I said, even within our sexes, we're going to have a variety of temperaments, but this is the aim for the majority effect. I once conducted a choir, and most of the people had a depressed look on their faces. There were a couple people that had manic smiles. I would say to the choir, smile, because I had to aim for the majority. And then some of the depressed people would smile, and the manic people would look even more manic, but they already look manic anyway. So it worked because I aimed for the majority. And I think that's what Paul's doing. He's not saying in every case, the women are going to be more anxious, and in every case, the men are going to be more avoidant. He's just kind of giving us some tools where we can offset what tends to be the case in the sexes. By the way, men get breast cancer, and by the way, women get Parkinson's, although typically Parkinson's affects males, but there are going to be exceptions. And yet we want in public health to talk about breast cancer mostly to women and Parkinson's mostly to men, because that's aiming for the target. So let's talk about intimacy for just a few more minutes before we close out here. The word for knowing in scripture is ginosko. Adam knew his wife. That's talking about sexual intimacy. And the word is also used to describe emotional and spiritual intimacy, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings. So God wants that gnosko for us, both physically, but also in a knowledge of each other. And so I'm going to give you some more exercises that'll help you get to know each other all over again, which is a cool thing, because what happens in marriage is we start seeing each other as, partners in all the tasks we have to do. You start seeing the other person solely in that way, you're going to lose your curiosity about them. We want to return to curiosity and get to know each other all over again. So this is a little game. And what you're going to do is take these 25 questions. You're going to take a sheet of paper with lines and number it from 1 to 25. You're going to fold the paper in half. You're going to write down your answers to all the questions on the first panel. And then you're going to switch papers. So both of you are going to do this, and you're going to switch papers and write down, then don't look at the first panel, and write down what you think your partner would answer in the second panel. And then you're going to open it up and you're going to compare how well you did with guessing each other's answers. And it's going to be really funny. Don't take it too seriously. It's kind of a game, but you can score it and have fun with it. And then you can also consider, and by the way, I'm dumping a lot of things on you, but I really, 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 really want you to continue to use these worksheets. A lot of thought and research and heart has gone into developing these worksheets, but so keep using them even after this workshop ends. Keep using these worksheets because it's going to make a difference in your life, I promise. So this is another exercise, because you're not going to be able to get to all this in 1 week's time unless you're like super involved, but chances are you're not going to be able to get to it. The gnosko date, and by the way, the Hebrew word most often used for knowing is yada, and the Greek word is gnosko. This activity will help you know one another better. Ironically, we tend to think we already do know each other, and we have this like yada, yada, yada attitude toward each other. So it's a little play on words there, but I want you to get to know each other all over again. This is really going to help. It's going to make a difference. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to schedule a 1-hour period with 0 distractions. It's a date. You can go out somewhere, have a wonderful meal, or go just for a walk in the park and sit on a bench somewhere. Don't make your dates too involved. Just take a little bit of time. It's more the quality of the conversation that matters, but you do need a section of time for it. So schedule that hour, put away your devices, find a babysitter. The idea is to sit down and talk to each other and use the EAR listening technique, okay? Ask each other about these 5 things and then say back to the other what you heard them say, and ask questions out of loving curiosity. So you're going to ask questions like, tell me about your childhood. What were your fondest hopes and dreams? What did you hope you would become? Share a best moment and a worst moment of your childhood, things like that. All right. And then I also have a whole list of mystery questions that I really want to get a deck of these done. So like a card deck that you can put on your coffee table, and you can pull out a mystery question every evening and ask each other the mystery questions. So that's also in your workbook, and you can play around with those. In knowing, 2 autonomous beings choose to blend into one. The will of each remains active, for love requires a choice, but at the same time, the one flesh union occurs. It's a breathtaking mystery. You have an opportunity to experience this mysterious oneness that scripturally is thought to be just a very strong allegory or metaphor of the gospel. So let me stop recording.